Hello, welcome to my channel on narcissistic abuse. I'm going to be talking today a little bit about gaslighting, which is an abusive technique used by narcissistic personalities, the covert, the malignant, the sociopath, and the effects of gaslighting on the victim or the target, the long-term effects and the short-term effects. I'm going to be reading from an article from narcissisticbehavior.net written by Christine. It's entitled The Effects of Gaslighting and Narcissistic Victim Syndrome. Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse used by narcissists in order to instill in their victims an extreme sense of anxiety and confusion to the point where they no longer trust their own memory, perception, or judgment. The techniques used in gaslighting by the narcissist are similar to those used in brainwashing, interrogation, and torture that have been used in psychological warfare by intelligence, operative law enforcement, and other forces for decades. The intention is to, in a systematic way, target the victim's mental equilibrium, I can't say that word, self-confidence, and self-esteem so that they are no longer able to function in an independent way. Gaslighting involves the abuser to frequently and systematically withhold factual information from the victim and replacing it with false information. Because of its subtle, this cunning Machiavellian behavior is a deeply insidious set of manipulations that is difficult for anybody to work out and to figure out what's going on in the dynamic. With time, it finally undermines the mental stability of the victim. That is why it is such a dangerous form of abuse. The emotional damage of gaslighting is huge on the narcissistic victim. I can attest that this is absolutely true. I was gaslighted very, very badly. I was exploited. I was used, and I developed narcissistic victim syndrome, and it was awful. It is a form of torture, sort of, and it is, narcissistic victim syndrome is a little bit like PTSD. It causes a lot of confusion, panic, doubting of self, pacing, insomnia, nightmares, getting sick, wanting to die. It's very, very, very severe on the victim. It's very real. And I wish there was more awareness about narcissistic victim syndrome. Victims of narcissistic abuse often don't even know what they're going through, can't articulate it to anybody, so they're left undiagnosed and they just are living a nightmare in their own minds and hearts. When they're exposed to it for too long, they begin to lose their sense of their own self. Unable to trust their own judgments, they start to question the reality of everything in their life. They begin to find themselves second-guessing themselves. And this makes them become very, very insecure around their decision-making, even around the smallest of choices. The victim becomes depressed and withdrawn. They become totally dependent on the abuser for their sense of reality. In effect, the gaslighting turns the victim's reality on its head. The purpose of gaslighting. What is the purpose? The gaslighting tango is a form of psychological warfare that is both deliberate and progressive in nature between one individual, the gaslighter, and another, the gaslightee. The gaslighting effect involves an insidious set of psychological manipulations that are carried out gradually in stages and repeated time after time in order to undermine the mental stability of its victim. It is truly a convoluted dance where finally this unsuspecting gaslighter believes that they are going crazy, and they may act a little crazy as well because they have been so messed with deep down in their souls, in their minds. They are so confused, in such a fog. Anyone can become the victim of these gaslighting maneuvers. Age, intelligence, gender, creed is no barrier against narcissistic abuse of this kind. It does not only happen in romantic relationships. It can occur in all different kinds of relationships, between parent and child, siblings, friends, work colleagues. Actually, it can happen between any two people in any walk of life if the intention is there. The gaslighting as the harassment technique starts with a series of subtle mind games that intentionally preys on the gaslighter's limited ability to tolerate ambiguity or uncertainty. This is done in order to undercut the victim's trust in their own sense of reality and sense of self, thus resulting in confusion and perplexity for the victim. Even when the victim is bewildered and left wondering what just happened there is a reluctance to see the gaslighter for what they are. And actually, it is this denial that is the cornerstone of the gaslighting relationship. Narcissists are puppet masters who manipulate their victims for personal gain. With precision, they are able to pull the strings of their victims without detection and render them helpless. Even in front of people, people won't really understand what's going on if they hear a dynamic between the gaslighter and the gaslightee. In fact, they might feel bad for the gaslighter because he may portray himself as calm, cool, and collected while he's pushing all of the gaslightee's buttons, and that person begins to, get very upset. The plight of the victims of the gaslighting effect. The plight of the victims of the gaslighting effect. During the process of gaslighting, the victim will find themselves going through emotional and psychological states of mind. In her wonderful book, The Gaslighting Effect, Robin Stern, PhD, speaks of 3 stages the victim will go through: disbelief, defense, and depression. She also goes on to flag down warning signs for recognizing when one is being gaslighted. I would like to expand a little on her analysis. Number 1, disbelief. Gaslighting is an extreme form of emotional abuse used by the narcissistic gaslighter to manipulate the innocent victim, gaslightee. The effects of gaslighting are so insidious that they can lead to the victim losing all trust in their own sense of judgment and reality. The victim's initial reaction to the gaslighting behavior is one of utter disbelief. They cannot believe the sudden change towards them, or indeed the fact that they are being gaslighted in the first place. All they know is that something terribly odd seems to be happening in the relationship, but they cannot figure out what it is that is happening. So something has gone on, maybe a situation has gone on, they know they're being gaslighted, they can't figure out what's going on, they start to become frantic, they're not sure what's being said about them if they're being smeared, they're trying to put all the pieces together, and they're in a complete fog, okay? All they know is that something terribly odd seems to be happening, but they can't figure out what's going on. Of course, this is precisely what the abuser wants after all. It would not work if the victim knew what was happening. So the abuser doesn't let them know, of course. Where once the abuser's communication with the victim had been accessible and stayed within the relationship, it is now becoming blocking and diverting. All they know is that where the narcissist had once held them in good heart, they have now become highly critical of them. The sympathy and support that had been available has now turned to disdain and antagonism. Whenever the victim, gaslightee, wants to reasonably discuss what is happening in the relationship, they are met with silence, or worse, they find that everything that is being said is being twisted around and trivialized. It is important to realize that the gaslighting does not need to be severe in order to have severe consequences on the victim. It can be as subtle as being told that you are so sensitive, or that they should not do something because you are not able to do it, just leave it to me. It can be something very, very subtle, and the effects of the abuse can be devastating to the victim of narcissistic abuse. Even though the victim can rationalize that these statements are untrue, gradually their confidence is being eroded away to such an extent that they cannot trust themselves. Gaslighting strokes, such as moving items from place to place and then the abuser denying that they had moved the item, really creates huge confusion to the victim. Or saying something, admitting something, and then later denying that they had said it or admitted it, or that's not what they meant, okay? When it was very, very clear, probably articulated well, that that's what they meant. Okay, all of this psychological warfare has the effect of making the victim doubt their own memory or perception of events, desperate for the gaslighter's approval and reassurance that they are not going mad. The victim becomes very dependent on their narcissistic abuser for a sense of reality. Defense. This is the next stage. Defense. At this stage, the victim still has enough of their self to fight and defend themselves against the gaslighting manipulation. They may stand up for themselves. They may get angry. They may declare this was what I was thinking, or they may still have enough of themselves to defend themselves, okay? However, the narcissist gaslighting, and they'll keep gaslighting, is beginning to do what it was intended to do. That is to throw the victim off balance by creating self-doubt, angst, turmoil, and guilt. This emotional damage causes the victim over time to lose their sense of reality and sense of self. The sense of self will be completely destroyed in this process. You won't even know who you are at the end of gaslighting abuse. Your whole sense of who you are, what you thought was happening, what you were perceiving, has been twisted and turned by the narcissist through pathological lying, through not telling the true story, through twisting things around so that they look like the victims and the heroes while you look like the horrible person. Okay, so becoming lost, confused, and unable to trust their own instincts and memory, they tend to isolate themselves somewhat because of the shame they feel. Before long, their psychic energy becomes depleted and they are left unable to defend themselves from the horrendous gaslighting effect. It's so bad at a certain point where you're just like, I can't even say anything. I mean, what am I going to say? Everything is being denied and turned around. I mean, here you are. You probably want to be a very authentic, or maybe a very real person. You want openness and honesty. You know, you want to say, this is where I messed up and this is why I did this. But they're not willing to do that. They live in a state of deception, denial, and manipulation that they do not turn from or repent of, whereas you do. So it becomes a point where how can you even reconcile with the narcissist? You can't, because one person will tell the truth, the other person will downplay and lie. Okay? So at this stage, the person's whole system may feel that it is in danger of annihilation. This is really true. When I was in a dynamic with narcissistic personalities, I thought I was going to die. I literally thought I was going to die. I started losing a ton of weight. I was getting sick. And not only that, but I thought that the narcissist, the one in particular, I was particularly afraid of, the malignant narcissist, very, very dangerous. I thought that my life was in danger. I really, really thought my life was in danger. From birth, nature builds in unconscious defense mechanisms and adaptive behaviors in order to protect the child from annihilation from early trauma. And these same defenses remain throughout life whenever we are vulnerable to highly stressful experiences that threaten us with annihilation. When the child starts life, they experience the world as a frightening place. So in order to reduce their fear, they need to form an emotional bond with somebody in order to reduce their stress and anxiety. It's usually with the mother, and they identify and bond with their main caregiver, and at some time in the future to experience her as their first aggressor. They could. Mother can be experienced by the child as being both threatening and kind. And this seems to lead to the child turning to emotional bonding for survival. This psychological condition is known today as Stockholm Syndrome. It doesn't just happen with a mother and child, and I'm assuming she's talking about a particular type of mother who is narcissistic in behavior, threatening and kind. And it is found to happen universally in situations where people find themselves to be held captive and in fear of their lives, as in kidnapping, hostage situations, and narcissistic abuse. This phenomenon, or trauma bonding with the narcissist aggressor, can be found in narcissistic victim syndrome. In Stockholm Syndrome, the victim adapts to the traumatic situation by unconsciously going into an regressive mode, where they return to childish infantile patterns of behavior and bond with their captor as they did with their mother earlier in life as a defense against annihilation. In order to cope with the discomfort of living within such madness, the victim's motivational drive provides a way that they can rationalize to reduce the dissonance they are experiencing, cognitive dissonance. Depression is another stage. Depression. By this stage, the victim can hardly recognize themselves. They are quickly becoming a shadow of their former self. Living under tyranny within a war zone where they are controlled physically, emotionally, unable to make decisions, subjected to the constant abuse, sucked dry, stripped of dignity and safety. They exist in a joyless life. They begin to feel that they can't do anything right anymore. They don't feel that they can trust their own mind, and they withdraw with a skewed reality of what is really taking place. They escape into depression. Many victims will also go on to experience post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, reliving, flashbacks, intrusive imagery, nightmares, anxiety. Number 2, avoidance, avoiding people, places or thoughts, emotional numbing, lack of interest, hopelessness. 3, arousal, difficulty concentrating, irritability, outbursts of anger, insomnia, and hypervigilance. She writes that when she is working with narcissistic victim syndrome, she has noticed that the victims were brought to the place of annihilation and death on many levels of the self while experiencing gaslighting behavior in their narcissistic relationships. Okay, so what are the signs of gaslighting? Second guessing. Because a victim has had their confidence eroded by the constant gaslighting, they live in fear of doing the wrong thing and making their situation even more dangerous for themselves. They invariably find themselves asking what if and always trying to second guess themselves. This often affects how they problem solve and make decisions in their lives. Number 2, they ask themselves, am I too sensitive? Am I crazy? Projection and blame are the hallmarks of gaslighting, and the victim become hypersensitive to the constant humiliation of their abusers. They hear countless times that they are too sensitive. How could they do that? How could they do that? They soon begin to believe all the lies about them. As a result, they look for approval before doing anything, fearful that they will make more mistakes or upset their abusers if they don't do what their abusers want. Not realizing that they don't have to do what their abusers want. They have a free will of their own. They can do what they want. But when I was being abused, I felt captive to the people who were abusing me. I felt like I had to do what they wanted, and if I didn't, I was going to be punished. And I was just always over apologizing. I always felt bad about everything when I actually wasn't doing anything wrong. So as a result, they look for approval before doing anything, fearful that they will make more mistakes that will end in more humiliation. This form of gaslighting makes the victim doubt everything about themselves, so they constantly ask, am I being too sensitive? Number 3, apologizing. Living with a narcissist, the victim finds themselves always apologizing for never doing the things right. They even apologize for their very existence. It is a way of avoiding more conflict with the aggressor. Apology is not just something the victim does to be polite. It is a powerful strategy for staying safe while in the war zone, and a means to disarm the anger of the gaslighter. most importantly, the power of apology is that it can take the shame off the narcissist and redirect it towards the victim, therefore avoiding some of the narcissist's anger at you. Okay, the next one. Okay, what number am I on? 4. Lack joy. They lack joy and happiness in life. They're very melancholic, okay? If one lives under the constant tyranny of the gaslighting narcissist, they can expect extremes of lethal hostility. Many victims go through physical and mental torture that can cause them to suffer a personality change, leaving them feeling confused, lonely, frightened, and unhappy. Often they continue to carry this melancholy even after they have escaped their abuser. Number 5, withholding information from others. Victims experience great shame about their situation. They get tired of trying to cover up their abuse as they go along. When well-meaning friends and family members tell them they are being abused, they avoid the subject, and soon they learn to withhold giving more information in order to avoid further conflict. The importance of shame in narcissistic abuse is a difficult issue, but I don't think it is too difficult to accept that the crimes of the gaslighting narcissist stigmatize the victim to their very core. Their shame is a normal response to the social failure they so often feel as a result of their abuse, i.e. the shame of being unable to protect themselves from the abuse, the shame that they allowed themselves to go through the abuse, the shame that they allowed people to have so much power over them. This shame can be seen as defensiveness and withdrawal by others. The relationship between shame and social supports is too complex to deal with here. The next one, number 6, knowing something is terribly wrong but you can't figure out what. The goal of gaslighting is to control and influence the reality of the gaslighting. It only works when the victim is unaware of what is really happening. The more the victim doubts their own reality or competence, the more dependent they become on the abuser. It is a vicious cycle of events that is totally confusing to the victim, and that is exactly what the gaslighter wants. Number 7, troublemaking simple decisions. Troublemaking simple decisions. To be caught in the narcissistic web of deception and illusion is the equivalent to being a fly trapped in a spider's web. This is so true. This is exactly how I felt. When entering the web, does the victim know that it is about to be bound up and eaten alive any more than the fly? The answer is no. However, the narcissistic web is akin to the disintegration of the self. The victim, under the threat of continual danger, forms a psychic bond with the abuser in order to avoid fragmentation of the self. In forming that bond, they are compelled to organize themselves around their idealized abuser's desires and surrender their authentic potential. Having to ask permission to do anything, not being allowed to have their own opinion, having to go along with what the narcissist says. Never allowed to win the argument, but the narcissist must win the argument. Constantly being chastised and humiliated. They will sit as judge and jury over you. They will declare things over you, compromising their own thoughts, values, needs, and beliefs. Understandably, caught in this web, they lose all autonomy, even their ability to make decisions for their own self. They lose the ability to make simple decisions. Number 8, you have the sense that you used to be a very different person, more confident, more fun-loving, and more relaxed. In order to survive, the victim enters into what is termed the narcissist dance. This is an unconscious defense mechanism which helps to keep the victim safe, but in so doing, they almost lose themselves by placating, complying, and appeasing. This becomes part of their way of being a great pleaser with everybody, unless this unconscious dance is exposed in therapy and the victim educated about narcissistic behavior. They are actually left vulnerable to becoming narcissistic supply again. The reason is that they are conditioned like Pavlov's dogs in a way that makes them a target for other hungry narcissists who are always on the hunt for new supply and are quick to spot those primed already. 9, you feel hopeless and joyless. What had once seemed like heaven has now turned into hell. There is no peace or joy, just fear and suppression. Life loses all hope, as if the light had been turned off. All that remains is the deep black cloud of depression. All the victim is forced to live in is a state of I don't know this word, in order to survive. Their perception of reality are continually undermined by the gaslighting shame. So they end up losing confidence in their intuition, their memory, or their reasoning powers. They are spun lies, and they tell them that they are oversensitive, imagining things, unreasonable, irrational, overacting, and they have no right at all to be upset. Hearing this time and time again, their reality is turned inside out, and they begin to believe that this may all be true. This very much happened to me. I was gaslighted really badly, and I just remember saying, God, is this true? What is this? Why is this happening? Like, I didn't understand why God allowed this. I just kept wondering, is my reality not right? Am I, what they're saying? I was constantly living in that. And victims they'll do a lot of self-reflection. The targets will do a lot of self-reflection, doubting of themselves. The narcissists never will. They never will. No. They don't self-reflect like most. The narcissist form of psychological abuse has managed to instill in their victim an extreme sense of anxiety and confusion to the point where they no longer trust their own memory, perception, or judgment. In this state, they are truly a hostage. However, many manage to get the courage to break free. But this is usually after several painful attempts. But when they do finally escape in time, they may find their way to your therapy room if you're a psychologist watching this. So, that is my little spiel on gaslighting. And this is from, again, narcissisticbehavior.net. And I thought it was just a really good article that really explained very thoroughly gaslighting, the effects of gaslighting, the signs that someone's being gaslighted, and everything. So I hope that this has helped you somewhat. I'm going to read from you Wikipedia. The Wikipedia definition of gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse in which a victim is manipulated into doubting their own memory, perception, and sanity. Instances may range from the denial by an abuser that previous abuse incidents ever occurred, up to the staging of bizarre events by the abuser with the intention of disorienting the victim. Here's another quick one I'll tell you about from abuseandrelationships.org. She writes a little bit about gaslighting. I'm going to skip to the middle paragraph here. Gaslighting happens most commonly when a survivor senses or perceives something about the primary aggressor that he does not want to admit. When the survivor brings this up, the primary aggressor denies what the survivor is actually perceiving or sensing. This is more than just disagreeing by tone and innuendo, or even outright. The perceptions are labeled improbable or crazy. Since information is incomplete, and since a sincere person is willing to contemplate being in error, the survivor begins to doubt herself. The primary aggressor also will emphasize and increase for a while those behaviors of his that are seemingly different. Also, since the primary aggressor knows what is actually going on, there will be a certainty of manner, while which it is a lie, is still convincing. Over time, doubt can grow to the point of which the survivor doubts her own sanity. So that too is another definition of gaslighting I found. So I hope this helps educate you a little bit into one of the tactics of the narcissistic abuser, which is gaslighting. A couple other ones you may want to look up is baiting and bashing, another narcissistic abuse technique, word salad games, circular conversations, smear campaigns often, and shaming and threatening as well. These are all abusive techniques that narcissists use against their victim and target. Thank you for watching.